This edition of Monterey's Cooking Pisto Style is brought to you by the Monterey County Vintners and Growers Association.
Hi, welcome to Monterey's Cooking. John Pisto and Bill Dewey from Taylor Shellfish Farm. And we're here in Olympia, Washington. And today we're going to talk about oysters. And what you see around us, folks, are oysters. These are different varieties. And Bill, you can tell me about some of the native things that are the native oysters we have and some of the introduced ones. And we went out and we picked a bunch of them. Let's go over here and let's see what we got.
Our company raises a lot of different types of oysters. There's a number of different species that grow in the Puget Sound. These are actually on the outside of this shell. These are native Olympia oysters. This is the original oyster that was here in the Puget Sound before man came here. Everything else here, all the other shellfish species, were introduced by farmers. The native Olympia still grows wild, and that's why you see it attached to this. This is actually a European oyster, or a European flat oyster. Another European flat oyster here. And then these are Pacific oysters. These were introduced in the 1920s, early 1920s. And that's the dominant oyster grown on the west coast of the United States.
Now, is the Japanese and the Pacific and the Portuguese, are they all the same?
Portuguese oyster, I think, I'm not sure on that. I think that's a different one. But the Japanese and Pacific, that's the same. And they're basically, when you see them in the marketplace, the Pacific oyster is usually named for the bay that it was grown in. For instance, these would be Steamboat Pacifics. And you might see Quilcene Pacifics or Hema Pacific or Westcott Pacific. But they're all Pacific oysters grown in different bays, where the European flats are typically called that and also maybe named for the bay that they're grown in.
And what do we got here?
And that's a Kumamoto. That's a different strain of the Pacific oyster, and that's full grown. That oyster is probably 2 years old, and it's a very favorite oyster in the raw bar in the half shell trade because of the deep cup. You see the deep cup, and like I say, that's as big as they get. So the meat nugget inside is very small and very appealing on the raw bar.
Yeah, these are very sweet too, I must say. Now, you know, we have primarily two really main uses for oysters: raw bar, and then the type you get when you order fried oysters. Of course, they can be used interchangeably, but when we're talking oysters on the half shell, we're really talking the Olympias and the European flat, the Kumamotos, and the smaller Pacifics.
The smaller Pacifics, yeah. Usually, these would be the high end of the size that we would harvest them for single. That's a granddaddy there.
I had to get this one to show you. I mean, you think that's an oyster? That's an oyster.
That's more typical of the size that we would chuck the meats out of.
Can you eat this?
Sure. I'm not going to do it here in front of the camera for you. But.
A little strong, probably strangle you.
Oyster steaks.
Oyster steak. That'd be interesting to play with this. But look at the variety. That's just terrific. And of course, these are all very, very delicious. And you know, they're loaded with zinc, which is very good for your health, among other things. Hey, Bill, maybe you could explain to everybody exactly what happens from start to finish quickly.
Okay, I'll do it as quick as I can. It's basically the first 3 weeks of an oyster's life, it's free floating in the water. It's plankton. And we do that in a hatchery in a controlled environment where we take the adults in, we spawn them, they release the sperm and eggs into the water, and you got a baby oyster. Swims around for 2 to 3 weeks in tanks, settles to the bottom, it goes through a metamorphosis where generally it will attach to another shell, cements onto a piece of shell. What we do for these baby single oysters is we grind up oyster shell so it's so small there's only room for one baby oyster on it. It attaches, and then we hold them in nursery systems, generally for 3 to 6 months, until we get them from when they first set out, they're 1/4 of a millimeter in size. We try to get them up to about the size of my pinky nail before we bring them out here and put them in these bags. So we have nursery systems. We actually have a nursery in Hawaii. We ship a lot of our animals to Hawaii and hold them in a nursery there, or we have nurseries here in the Puget Sound. Get them big enough to put them in these bags, and we'll put about 10 dozen per bag. And the bags are necessary because you can see the beach is kind of exposed, and on a day like today with this wind here, the oysters will just wash away when the tide comes back. So we have to keep them in the bags to hold them here on the beach. And And on this beach here, it takes us about 18 to 24 months before the oysters get up to these sizes where we're going to harvest them.
There's a lot of work. You can really see why, boy, it's worth every penny of it too.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into the farming. There's been a lot of new technology developed in recent years in the hatcheries and so on.
No, very, very interesting stuff. Okay, let's go further down the beach and let's see what's going on. Okay, Bill, boy, that tide's coming in pretty fast here, isn't it? Bill, give us some kind of figures of what's happening with the oysters, how popular they're becoming now. People are really eating a lot more oysters now. It's becoming very popular. And
well, we're seeing a change, I think, in people's diet as they eat the oysters. One, we're seeing traditionally people ate a lot of pan-fried oysters and oyster stew, and as people are orienting more towards heart-smart food, we're seeing new recipes come out where you don't have the breading and the frying, and so we're also seeing quite a transition to more and more raw consumption. The raw bars are more popular. We're seeing an influx, more and more raw bars opening up, and our sales have shifted from 10 years ago. Our company's sales were probably only 2 or 3% in the raw trade.
Wow.
Today, they're probably closer to 20% of our oysters or more are sold into the raw trade.
It's a great trend. And by the way, I can see how you folks do things here. You're just really world class. And
we enjoy it. The Taylor family they're farmers.
Yeah.
You know, they enjoy the farming. The marketing is an aside for them. What they really love doing is coming out here and farming shellfish.
Wow. And you know, right alongside us here are the famous Kumamotos, and I mean, just bags of them, which we're gonna take some for lunch, by the way. Folks, wasn't that interesting? I tell you, I'm really in an element, in my own element, when I'm touching and picking and eating. Boy, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed that. You know, I'm also very, very happy to say we have some new sponsors with us, the Monterey County Wine Growers and Vintners, okay? You know, a lot of you probably don't realize this, but we have between 30 and 40 different wineries in Monterey County. And you know, we've been producing wine here for quite a long time. I know I started in the 70s in Monterey, and I remember Monterey Vineyards was one of the pioneers, but they've been growing grapes for many years. All our juice was going up north, that other place, you know, I don't want to mention. but now, you know, we're coming into our own, and these people are bottling their own fruit now. And, you know, we're happy. Chateau Julien has been around since 1982. He gave us his reserve, and I tell you, it's absolutely delicious, especially with oysters and shellfish or any kind of fish. I'm really, really pleased to have him. Really tickled to death. Thank you. Let's get on with our oyster cooking, okay? We're going to do fried oysters Italian style. Italian style means we're going to be using some olive oil for frying, okay? Get your oil going, and we're going to kind of semi-deep fry these. We're going to pan fry. Okay, these are the shucked oysters, okay? You buy these in these jars. Make sure they're fresh. Check the dates on them. Make sure you buy them from a good source. Tell those guys we only want fresh ones. Nothing worse than a bad oyster, folks. Okay, Italian style. What makes it Italian? Olive oil is one. And we're not using extra virgin. We're using just a pure olive oil. That's all you need. You don't need all that extra flavor. Flour, beaten eggs, and my breadcrumbs consist of cheese, garlic, and parsley. Okay? This is going to give it that nice flavor. I tell you, my mom makes these on Christmas Eve, and boy, they're good the next day, the next evening, and everybody just goes by and we just keep eating them. They're so delicious. Now, when you're doing fried oysters, I would suggest that you use these small ones, because the big ones are a little bit too much. Okay, so you go flour, egg batter. Now I put, like I said, cheese, salt, pepper. See how you do this? Okay, let's do that all at once. And these small ones, just delicious. Now, if you don't want to do Italian, you can do Cajun. You can do, which Cajun would mean you do it in some cornmeal, and that has a tendency to come out a little crunchier. You can do cracker meal, comes out nice. Season it up a little bit. And don't rinse these out, okay? Do not rinse these when you get them, because you're going to take all that nice flavor from the ocean out of these. Now, I don't know if we have any tape showing up in Seattle where they were clean, or they were actually shucking these oysters, and you know, it's all done where you know, it's not rinsed or anything. They want the brininess of the oyster to really come through. Otherwise, it's going to taste real flat. Also, when you're in a restaurant, you ask the waiter, if you're having oysters on the half shell, that they don't rinse the oyster out in fresh water. Now, I've seen that done, and boy, that makes me very, very, very upset, because they've just washed off all that beautiful flavor from the ocean, that natural salt. Now, you see this? That's the dirty hand. This is the clean hand. So this is the one you bread with, and this is the one you dip with. So you see, now you don't want to pound it too much, okay? You don't want to, otherwise, because these are fairly delicate. Okay, I'm just going to do enough. But you see how easy it is? This way you keep one hand clean. Okay, see, there's not much to that. Everyone loves fried oysters, don't they? I do. Boy, I just love them. Okay, it's ready for frying. You want your oil at about 375 degrees. Check it with the thermometer. I check mine just by, I just happen to know how hot it is. If it's too hot, you're going to burn it. If it's too low, it's going to soak up the oil. So you want to make sure, you see, it has a tendency to spit a little bit, so be careful. Just let them in there nice. You want that to be cooking real good. It needs to come up a little bit, maybe just up it a little bit. Okay, let's move this out of the way. Do not, I repeat, do not play with these guys, all right? You don't want to fidget around with them, because they're going to end up breaking on you. And then if that happens, you're going to have mess. You're going to have little pieces floating around all over the place. You have to strain your oil. So you let it turn. Boy, that smells good. Put garlic in there, parsley. You let that cook just like that. Again, you know, I got to stress, oysters have such a mystique to them. You know, especially all these different varieties that we're eating nowadays. You know, there's something about oysters and white wine or champagne. There's something that ice cold oyster and wine brings joy to my heart, folks. Really does. Okay, you want these to get rather brown. Keep your oil going. Okay, folks, look at that. Pull them out. You see? Now I'm putting them on some paper towels to let that excess oil drain off. You see, it's got a nice coating on them, golden brown. Now this oil, you put it through a strainer and then fry the next batch. And just keep doing that. You know, you got a little strainer like this. They'll take all the particles out, because that's what makes your oil dirty, you see. There's all the particles being fried in there. So let's just roll it. We don't want any of that excess oil. Again, this is good, the good stuff, olive oil. Look. Now, some people do dips and this and that, and you know what? I like it just like this. You see how easy this was? Okay, when we come back, we're going to do the famous oyster stew. Okay? Okay, folks, before I make the oyster stew, because that just takes a second. Okay, that's real quick. I want to teach you some stuff about eating oysters on the half shell. First, let me show you how to shuck them properly. You need the right type of knife. You need a shucking knife. I've seen guys use can openers, screwdrivers. I mean, everything you can imagine. Nice way to, you can always tell who's been shucking with a knife because the points are always broken off. you gotta buy a shucking knife. That's all. You gotta buy them. Restaurant supply places, at Monterey Bay Restaurant Equipment, they got them. Invest in them. They're very cheap, but you know they'll end up saving you a lot of anguish. Now, very easy. Place it down. Put your hand on top. Okay. Here's the muscle. You want to get right into this muscle. You see this? See the separation? Okay, it's all in the wrist, folks. Look, just work it. You hear that pop? Did you hear that pop? Okay. Lift it up. You lift it up. You hit the top shell to loosen the muscle. Okay. And there you got a perfectly shucked oyster. Now, opening is one thing. Next thing you have to do is loosen the muscle on the bottom. Okay, so with the knife you do the same thing. Try not to hack it up. Okay, this is what I tell my boys when they're opening oysters. The oyster's got to look beautiful. Now, the next thing, smell it. Now, what does an oyster smell like? It smells like the ocean at low tide. That beautiful, salty, briny smell. Very, very, almost a little sweet. Oysters will take on flavors depending on what they eat and where they're raised. Okay? Some of these are all the same type of oyster. This is a different variety. This is a different variety. But most of these are the same species of oyster. They're only raised in different bays. The different bays give them their different characteristics and their flavors. Okay? Now, to eat an oyster, I just like pure lemon. A couple of drops. Remember what I said. Smell it. It's got to smell good. Give it a good. And you see the juice? And you drink the juice. Now, this is a natural with wine or champagne. Monterey County wine, we hope. Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blancs, incredible with oysters. Okay, now let's go on to our stew. Oyster stew, very, very, very simple to make and pretty good for you too. Needs onion. Okay, we get the fire going. This was one of my dad's favorites. He loved oyster stew, boy. And what's nice about it, you can buy these oysters in the jar, and they're all ready to go. Now, we got to put a little bit of garlic in my oyster stew. I know you're not supposed to, but you know, just a little bit, because I want that. Okay, we need a little bit of butter. There's my butter. Okay, we want butter just for. Now we don't want to fry this. We just want to sweat this a little bit. And when I say sweat, I mean we just want to cook the rawness out of the onion. Now that may take you a couple minutes. Ingredients are pretty simple on this. You know, nothing in the morning. They say this is one of the greatest hangover cures in the world. Big bowl of oyster stew, half a loaf of bread, and a big glass of beer. I don't know, never tried it. Sounds good though. Now we don't want this, do not brown. We don't want the flavor of browned oysters in here. Okay, now we're going to do a little, see, if I had more oyster nectar, I'd put it, but I've got, this is clam juice. We'll use that, that's pretty close. Make sure you stir it, get all this good stuff off the bottom. Okay, we're going to give it a little bit of clam juice, a little bit of sherry, a little bit of celery seed. This is important, very important to put the celery seed. A little bit of Tabasco, and a little bit of Worcestershire, and there you got your poaching liquid. We're going to give it a little bit of cream. Now I'm not going to add potatoes. Some people add potatoes, but I think the real oyster stew does not have potatoes. Now it needs pepper. Now your oysters are going to be salty, so you remember to taste it first before you add the salt. Now, when you have your oysters out of the jar, do not, I repeat, that tastes good already. Do not drain the nectar off, the juice. Okay, that's what's really going to make this taste good. There it is. Okay, there's one. See, we're putting all that good juice in there. Now you figure about 6 to 8. If they're small, maybe more, maybe 10 or a dozen. Now watch it very closely. Okay, remember what I said? Do not overcook the oysters. You just want them to be barely cooked. See that? How they're just wrinkled the mantle? Now, you know, some places what they do is they put a nice big chunk of butter right in there. Okay, and I garnish it with some onion, with some the green top. Chives would work beautifully. And folks, can I taste this? Just the juice. These are two extremely delicious dishes, real easy to make, and of course with the Chardonnay, especially from Monterey County, it goes absolutely fantastic. And I want to thank Chateau Julien for giving us their private reserve. It is delicious.